Guys, I'm recording this on Friday, May 23rd, for the event that begins to take place tomorrow, Saturday, May 24th. Caveat that I live on a farm and there's some clucking chickens in the background, and there's really no getting around it because I gotta do this now. So my apologies, but let's get to it. So we're going to talk about Saturn. I'm going to do this a little bit differently. General theme, Saturn into Aries, but instead of just me talking at the camera, I'm going to put up some visuals. I'm a very visual person. So let me just give you really quickly kind of the swath of the backdrop, and then I'll put up some slides for you to look at. So it's Saturn moving into Aries is what's happening tomorrow, but also Saturn conjoining Neptune moving into Aries, which is a bit of a adds as a bit of a twist, and there's still some predictability. So let's just first remember that Saturn enters Aries once every 29.4 years. That is the cycle of Saturn. Saturn spends about 2.5 years loosely in the sign of Aries. And this is a historically significant time for a couple reasons. It's often thought, or well, when we look through the themes, we're going to go back in the past of every time Saturn's been in Aries, and also the conjunctions with Neptune. And hopefully you'll get to see the themes of leadership, conflict, innovation, and also really like assertion of identity. So while Aries is ruled by Mars, that's going to give the sort of action, I am flavor of things, the energy of initiation as well. Saturn is ruled by Capricorn. That's going to be a more methodical, responsible, structural, karmic lessons energy. So when these two meet, the good news is that they're not super polarized. It's not in its downfall. They're not in their downfall, and they're not in their exaltation. They're in this kind of midland. So what's possible when they meet? Well, there could be a clash between control and action. There can also be some kind of a restructuring of individual will and individual power. So this is going to be, the next 2.5 years, a really wonderful period for personal and collective transformation. The theme just keeps weaving itself through, right? So this transit is happening. This transit is happening starting tomorrow. Starting tomorrow until September 1st. This year is the first time we see this, and then Saturn's going to go back into Pisces, but then February 13th, 2026 until 2028, April 2028 is going to be the time. So really, we're going to start working with this energy tomorrow on the 24th of May. And again, the themes are leadership, conflict, innovation, the identity, meaning, and assertion. And so that's Saturn in Aries, but there's a unique flavor that I mentioned that's coming from this particular transit, and that is the conjoining of Neptune. So that happens during this year. It begins tomorrow. It peaks in February next year, and it's still operational. That conjunction is operational until 2027. So really, for the bulk of Saturn being in Aries, Saturn's going to be conjoined to Neptune. So let's talk about that for a moment, because that doesn't happen every time Saturn goes into Aries. This is giving a particular mojo, a particular flavor of Saturn and Aries. That's why I wanted to do a little bit of a deeper dive. And so I just said Saturn has a 29.4-year cycle. So that makes Saturn returns a thing that people grapple with. You've probably heard of a Saturn return. Every 30 years, Saturn comes back into our lives to help us set things right. But compare 30 years loosely to 165 years. Neptune has a 164.8-year cycle. So compare 30 to 165, we're beyond what we currently know as the human lifespan. So that is no longer a personal planet. It's a generational planet. You've heard me say that before. So this means we can also go back 164, 165 years ago and look and listen to what Neptune was doing. So we're going to do both things during our time together today. So let me go ahead and get the slides going for us. Okay, so let's start with something that I think is somewhat consequential. Saturn was in Aries in 1790, from 1790 to 1793. The Bill of Rights was ratified on December 15th, 1791. And that's interesting for the times that we live in because, you know, well, Aries is the exaltation of sun, of authority, of leaders, of autonomy, of I amness, of individuality. The express purpose of the Bill of Rights was to enumerate individual rights that would be protected by the government and from the government, right? So Saturn's position in Aries could be read as the establishment of individual rights, the worth of an individual, as a check on the powers of leadership. But let's just go ahead and go back to the last time Saturn was in Aries, and that was April 96 to June 98. So those themes were about military action, youth rebellion, tech rise, personal empowerment. Some themes that happened then was the dot-com boom. There was massive, technology growth. I remember going to school in Silicon Valley and not being able to find a place to rent because the dot-com was going off so much. Princess Diana was killed, or she died in 1997. And 1997 also there was the Hong Kong handover. That's when the UK returned Hong Kong to China. That was a significant geopolitical power shift. And let's go back to Princess Diana, because that kind of sparked a level of global grief. It wasn't just that a particular country that mourned the loss of Diana. It really kind of, some call it conspiracy theories, but some started to question the role of institutional responsibility. There was also the Heaven's Gate cult mass suicide in 1997. So this was intense themes of leadership, intense themes of belief, intense themes of identity crisis. And, Neptune's the planet of illusion and delusion. We'll get to that in a second. This is about Saturn. But we've also saw, Backstreet Boys and Britney Spears. There was a rise in teen pop culture. Young voices were entering into the music scene and getting noticed. And then we go back to the previous time Saturn was in Aries, and that was March 1967 to April 1969. So here again, themes revolution, civil rights, war, redefining power structures. So that was when the Vietnam War intensified, and there was a mass protests about that in the US. There was also the Summer of Love in 67. That was a youth counterculture movement, and it challenged authority and it advocated for love and peace. There was also the assassination of Martin Luther King and John Kennedy. And again, these are lessons and, larger conversations about leadership and justice. Civil Rights Act of 1968, that's the Fair Housing Act. That was just after MLK was assassinated, and that addressed the systemic equality in housing. And also, Apollo 8 went to orbit in 1968. That was the first manned spacecraft to orbit the moon. So Aries is pioneering space with discipline, Saturn. So those themes are kind of swirling. I hope you can take these themes as I'm talking about them and realize that some of this stuff is in its own unique way percolating. Let's go to 1937 and 1940. Then now those themes were war buildup, authoritarianism, and pioneering technology. We had rise of a few totalitarian regimes: Hitler in Germany, Franco in Spain, Mussolini in Italy. And this was leaders asserting authoritarian Saturnian control through aggression, Aries. Start of World War II, Germany invaded Poland. Spanish Civil War ended in 1939. And then there were technological advancements that were kind of different than we see now, but the development of the jet engine. And that was kind of swinging the door open to a new era of warfare and a new era of travel and innovation. And it was also a turning point in Nazi persecution of the Jews. So I hope that you can see, just with looking at those little snippets of Saturn and Aries, some of the other themes and views were institutionalization of law enforcement. The FBI was formed during one of these transits. And so technological innovation, cultural shifts, geopolitical changes. Let's now switch gears and let's look at Neptune being conjoined Saturn. As I mentioned at the start of this video, that doesn't happen every single time, but it does just so happen that whenever Neptune is conjoining Saturn, they are both in Aries. So the last time this happened was in 1861 and 1862. And here's a slide with some of the events that were present during this time. The American Civil War began in 1861 with a Confederate attack on Fort Sumter in South Carolina. 11 Southern states seceded from the Union during that year. During 1862, there were major battles, and we had Lincoln, the president, begin to shape the war around emancipation, and he was setting the stage for the Emancipation Proclamation. In Italy during that time, the Kingdom of Italy is officially proclaimed with Victor Emmanuel II as king. Rome and Venetia are still outside Italy's control. They were held by the papacy instead of Italy. In Russia, we have the emancipation of the serfs. So Tsar Alexander II issued the Emancipation Edict, freeing more than 23 million serfs, servants. And this was one of the largest acts of liberation in European history. So this starts major social and economic changes in Russia. But, all of Europe isn't that far away from Russia. So the energy is reverberating out. In Mexico, the French invasion began. And late in 1861 into 1862, both France, Britain, and Spain all sent forces to Mexico. France ended up staying, invading, and leading to the second French intervention in Mexico. And then by the end of 1862, Cinco de Mayo is where it origins, folks. The Battle of Puebla. They defeated the Mexicans. Mexico defeated the French. In China during this time, we had the Taiping Rebellion, a massive civil war with millions of deaths. And there was also Emperor Zhang. He became co-regent, and this began a long influence over Chinese politics. Western powers, particularly Britain and France, expand influence in treaty ports. In the UK, there's a global power transition that happens during this time. Britain maintains a policy of neutrality in the American Civil War, but is economically impacted because of cotton shortages in the South. And so this was focused on an imperial administration and economic growth. So this supports scientific advances and reforms at home in the UK. In Japan, this was known as the Bakumatsu period. And this was growing internal unrest, increased Western pressure for trade. And in 1962, there was the Namamugi incident. That's when a British citizen was killed, and this led to tensions between British and Japan. So I hope you can see that some of these themes, I'm not going to say what my interpretation is, because I think that it's not for me to say anything or to know anything. But I find it just interesting when I was reading and realizing that this transit is, and this time, as humanity continues to ascend. I like to frame this with the Yuga cycles. The Kali Yuga, we're coming out of the Kali Yuga, where the Yuga cycle is a 24,000 year cycle of time, and humanity is in the top of the Yuga cycle, is at this space where massive technology, co-creation, peace, things that we can't even imagine, and it descends into darkness at the bottom, and we're kind of right coming out of the darkest of ages, but we're coming up out of the darkest of ages. So all those things that I just read you are of the past. They are of darker times. I would like to personally offer, take it or leave it, but they're equally important times. It's palpable how important these times are. But this is why I love meditation. This is why I love the idea of the technological revolution, of the fact that I can sit in this year in Northern California and I can speak to people around the world. That's fantastic. Information is being exchanged in very different ways. Even if we think about how we're getting information about everything in our world, we can feel that this is very different than even 5 years ago where we're at. So I think that it's a really important time for us to be awake and to be optimistic and to be aware, though, of what the energies are. So new beginnings in leadership, conflict between powers and citizens, innovation, massive innovation, and the importance of individual rights and the assertion of individual identities. I hope that you found this helpful. If you did, and if you want me to do this again, this is just a little experiment. I'm happy to do it for any of the other major transits. So drop a note in the comments and let me know. And cheers to Saturn moving into Aries. See you guys.